It was the end of November. By the way, I live in a village and there is no shame in it. My girlfriend went to her mom's in the city for the weekend. I don't like her mom very much and, therefore, I got very sick. It was pouring rain, which ruined all my plans for the evening. I didn't see much point in sitting at home alone, but I had to. I was too lazy to sit down at the computer, so I started surfing the internet from my cell phone. First, I looked at phones. I really wanted to buy a new one. Then, smoothly transferred to sites with scary stories. To all the joys, I read so much that I was afraid to go to the toilet, and then the light went out. It happens a lot here. The old transformer is no longer usable, and no one wants to replace it. It's better to sit without light than to contribute to the common good. I don't know how many horror stories I read there, but I was scared to even get out of the blanket. It was raining like a bucket. At times I began to feel as if something was banging on the window. But I didn't take it seriously. I found a pack of cigarettes in my pocket and decided to smoke without leaving the room. I had an ashtray there just in case. I sat down and lit a cigarette. And, a second later, I was stunned. Something was scratching on the window behind me. I was really scared, but I told myself that it was just rain. I was starting to calm down when the sound became even more disgusting. I pulled back the curtain and was really startled. Opposite the window stood an old woman, very ugly, hooked nose, eyes almost invisible, thin fingers and huge nails on her hands, if you can call them that. I could not move. The old woman, meanwhile, greedily leaned against the window and began to run her finger along the glass. I, dazed with fear, watched. Then she ran at a speed that I had never run at before I smoked. I stared out the window for a second, then went numb with terror again, wondering if the front door was closed. I didn't check. Closing the curtain and the bedroom door, I rushed under the covers. Every rustle in the room and outside the window drove me crazy. The rain slowly stopped. The room was filled with a silence that frightened me more than the sounds of rain. In the next room, I distinctly began to hear movement. Then an unintelligible moaning. If anyone had seen me then, I was all white. Moans, footsteps, sometimes voices. Sometime in the morning I fell asleep. My favorite girl woke me up. I looked at her frightened at first, then, gradually coming to my senses, told her what I had seen in the night. She made me laugh, saying that I had read too many horror stories. Maybe I had. But the footprints in the flower bed, just opposite the window, told me otherwise. Plus, on the second day I found a strange bag near my doorstep, or rather under it, and I just burned it. The rain kept pouring down, thunder rumbled somewhere on the horizon, and lightning ripped the sky. The thoughts in my head in the fresh air came to me by themselves. I should be bolder with this nice girl from the sales department. It's about time I started thinking about a birthday present for my sister. I buried myself deep in my thoughts and only came to my senses when the first ray of sunlight peeked out from behind the clouds, only to blind me for a second and then disappear back into the clouds. I rubbed my eyes and decided to look around our yard. The yard, by the way, was surprisingly decent. Neat trees stood about 20 meters from the house, a small playground, lots of greenery. After a quick glance around the yard, I realized that there was something wrong here. There was something in the yard that shouldn't be there. Once again, looking through the visibly thinning rain into the depths of the yard, I saw a man there, under the crown of a tree. There was something repulsive about him, something that the subconscious guesses at once and begins to send alarm signals to the more primitive parts of the mind. Perhaps it was his clothing of a very strange kind. The long black cloak and wide-brimmed hat looked decidedly out of place in the height of summer. He seemed to be some KGB agent who somehow didn't know that his structure no longer existed and that it was another century. Perhaps it wasn't the clothes, but his posture. He stood there and in the time I was looking at him, he didn't move once. No, he changed his position once, when he raised his head up and stared at my open window, from which I was staring at him so brazenly. Like most people who get caught peeping, I looked away hastily and even retreated a couple steps back into the apartment. There I finished my cold coffee. The rain had stopped, and I decided to go to the window again. There was a courtyard, but I didn't pay much attention to it then, and after a couple of days I forgot about it. A month passed, the heat began to subside. My friends and I decided to go to the movies. The show was at 9 p.m. I don't like to be late, so I decided to leave the apartment at 9:30, despite the fact that it was a 15-minute walk to the movie theater. As luck would have it, it started raining at the beginning of the 9th hour. I called Sashka to discuss plans regarding going to the movie. In the rain we decided that we are not sugar, we will not melt. We'll somehow get to the movie theaters. Before I left, I remembered the story about the Kagabeshnik in the rain. Laughing to myself, I looked out the window. The yard was empty. I took my keys, turned off the light in the apartment and went out to the landing. I live on the 6th floor, and the elevator works, but I prefer to walk down. When I reached the 3rd floor, I felt a sudden and inexplicable prick of anxiety. On the 2nd floor I met a neighbor who was hurrying to her apartment. The anxiety somehow let go at once, and I went down to the 1st floor. As I approached the last small staircase that led to the door to the street, I froze. My knees began to tremble, my heart was pounding so hard that the tenants on this floor must have been able to hear its thudding on the door. There he was. Standing there looking right at me. And not just at me, he was looking into my eyes. Perhaps he was looking somewhere through them, much deeper, somewhere that not everyone can look into. He was looking into my soul. He didn't move, just stood there and stared. I grabbed the railing to keep from falling, for my legs refused to hold my limp body. Fear gripped me completely, made me its slave. Whether it was his appearance that frightened me, or the smell of him, it was the disgusting odor of burnt rubber. I realized that I was falling into some abyss only in the next moment, when his incredibly pale face, which seemed to have never felt the warm rays of the sun and had never given birth to any emotions before, suddenly began to stretch in a hideous grin, exposing sharpened triangles, not large teeth. I looked as if hypnotized at this, which had already become an inhuman grin, when he said, "Soon we'll come again, we always come with the rain, and this time we'll be closer." Somewhere upstairs a door slammed and the ringing voices of children were heard. It brought me out of my stupor. I turned around and ran as fast as I could up the stairs. As I ran up the 1st flight to the 2nd floor, I glanced down to where he was standing. There was no one there. The rain had stopped. I don't remember what I lied to my friends then, but I knew only one thing: the truth was impossible to tell. It was too dangerous for them. Autumn came. The rains became more frequent, though not as fierce as in the summer. I often began to stay late at work, to be with friends more often, and in public places in general. I came home only at night, but nothing helped me to get rid of the ever-growing sense of danger, the feeling that someone was always watching me, the feeling that I was no longer in control of my life and my fate was already decided. It was another gray day, soaked with fear and chronic depression. My sister came to visit me. She's a big smarty pants. She and I talked all day, and in the evening the doctor came, examined me briefly, and talked to my sister about something. The nurse came into the room with a small list of medicines that the doctor recommended I buy. I tried to refuse, saying it would go away. The nurse didn't want to hear anything, grabbed my coat. She took my purse and skipped outside to the nearest drugstore. I heard the door slam downstairs, and then I cried. I don't know why, just a sudden pang of self-pity. I'm not a righteous man, but I haven't sinned much in my life. I always gave up my seat on the subway, helped grannies lift their bags up the steep stairs. So why did I? And I looked at the balcony glass. My eyes were still moist. I wiped them off, but there was still a drop in front of my eyes, and I shook my head, and the tears came. It was raining again. All the glass was in long streaks of water. I rose up on my elbows, assessing my chances of getting away from the damn house as soon as possible. My temperature was around 39, my body was pounding with coarse shivers. However, fear pushes a man to incredible feats. I got up, washed my face with cool water and began to dress in a hurry. When I got to the front door, I started to turn the lock. God, it was a good thing that beforehand, for some unknown reason, I decided to look through the peephole. There he was on the landing, staring at me through the door. Not a drop of dirt on his perfectly polished shoes, not a drop of water hanging from the brim of his huge hat. Yet something in his appearance had changed. It was his look. The look of a man who was no longer tolerable. And the nasty smile seemed to grow even wider. I realized that I had begun to fall into something viscous again, into something unpleasantly sticky, into madness. When he lifted his hand, which had a glove tightly pulled over it, and began scrubbing his index finger on the door. "Open it, I must come in. It's time. Your time." The door began to vibrate faintly. I put my hands on the key. I was going to turn the lock. The grin on his face grew wider and sharper, his sharp teeth beginning to drool. Suddenly the elevator buzzed, signaling that someone had arrived on the floor. For a moment the face of the cage bearer was distorted with a grimace, absolutely no anger. After that, however, the former smile returned to his face, and he put his index finger to his lips. After that, I felt myself start to let go. I started blinking frantically, and in a couple of seconds there was no one else on the set. After a few more moments, my sister came out from around the corner. The sister stayed on the landing, searching for her keys in the endless pockets of her cloak. I, on the other hand, decided to take advantage of this time to undress and duck under the blanket. The creature's gesture made it clear that no one should know he was here. Somehow I was sure he wasn't kidding. I didn't live at home anymore, usually sleeping at my sister's house. She let me in without question. To be honest, she never missed an opportunity to be with her brother, unlike me. Today it snowed for the first time, a timid snowball that had been falling all morning, only to melt into thin rivulets of water in a couple of hours. And tomorrow I was going to move into a new rented apartment on the other side of town, so it would take longer to get to work than before. But I was ready to grasp at any straw. Today I had to go back to my apartment to pack, and I would never dare to do that in my life. But my sister's perplexed face convinced me that she wouldn't tolerate another inexplicably childish act from me. At least not without a plausible explanation. All the more so because my sister offered to help me, and we agreed to meet at my place in the evening after work. It was a sunny day, and my mood was elevated for the first time in 6 months. The feeling of constant danger was gone, so after work I went home without fear. The cloudless sky overhead only added to my optimism. When I entered the apartment, I walked around all the rooms, exhaled, and began to pack quickly. My sister was due in an hour. Sorting through old magazines, I went deep into my thoughts. I was brought out of my stupor by the sound of a bang. I listened, everything seemed quiet. 10 seconds later, the sound came again. Thunder. A storm was coming. At the end of the fall, all the fears that I thought I was able to overcome in myself came with a new force. I sat on the floor, unable to do anything. The storm was coming at me. The rain was pouring down in a solid wall, beating a nightmarish drum on the tin windowsill, and I realized that this was the end. All my pathetic attempts, all my tricks, all were in vain. They're coming. The smell of burnt rubber filled the apartment completely. I started to feel dizzy, and I didn't leave the room, but I could feel him standing in the hallway. I couldn't see him, but I knew a smile was literally tearing across his face. And I was sitting with my back to the open door to the hallway. I didn't hear footsteps, but I know he's moving closer and closer. He can see that I'm typing this text right now. I can see the blurry reflection of his face on the glossy surface of the laptop. Even closer. I almost can't breathe from the smell of rubber. The back of my neck, I can feel his breath. Impossible. Rare size for a normal person. Every few minutes they burn me. He stands right in front of me. Tears roll down my eyes. Typing becomes almost impossible. He raises his hand and removes his glove and his fingers. He says, "You know now, we will come. We always come with the rain,